Hello and welcome to the training on the contract process for student organizations. This presentation will discuss when a contract is needed, how to request a contract, and the process of the contract after the event form is submitted. The university requires that anytime someone is coming to campus to perform some sort of service, a contract is needed for liability purposes. This means that anybody that's not a current Drexel student, faculty, or staff member who's coming to campus to perform a service such as speak at an event, take photos, provide DJ services, provide rental equipment such as inflatables, anything along those lines, would be required to complete a contract in order to be part of your event. Contracts may also be needed if your organization is hosting an event at an off-campus venue, which requires a signed invoice or contract to reserve that space. Anytime you plan on bringing anyone outside of Drexel to campus or are given anything that may require a signature for an off-campus event, we are here to help. The most important thing to remember when it comes to contracts is to never sign a contract or invoice. It is against Drexel policy for individuals to sign off and agree to any terms on behalf of the university. In fact, there are only a handful of people at the university who have the authority to sign any form of agreements that Drexel enters into, which would include your student organization event contracts, as student organizations are a Drexel entity. Signing a contract could also get you into serious legal trouble, as you would be held liable for the terms in the agreement, which could also include any form of payment. Anytime you are unsure about if you should sign something, don't hesitate to reach out to student organization resource and finance staff, and they will help you through the process. While you will not be managing the full contracting process, you will need specific information to pass on to the student organization resource and finance staff to get started. As you're working with the vendor on your event details, be sure to get these details to make the process run smoothly. Staff will need the vendor name and contact information, both email and phone, to get in touch with the vendor with the contracting process. The agreed upon price is also needed, as this must be confirmed by your organization prior to starting the contract. The price is included in the contract, so it is important you have worked with your organization to be sure it is in your budget and acceptable by both your organization and the vendor. The last piece of information will be a brief description of what the vendor is doing, so that the staff is able to determine what type of agreement to utilize. Not only are you getting the information we just discussed from the vendor, but it is important that the vendor is aware of Drexel's contracting process. Sometimes there are vendors that are not able to work with Drexel's contracting process, and the vendor letter helps to give a brief overview of what they can expect. Sharing the vendor letter with your vendor helps you to avoid issues later down the road where you think you have them confirmed, but at the last minute they leave you scrambling before the event because they're unable to work with Drexel's process. Most vendors don't have issues with the process as long as they're aware of it, but the vendor letter should always be shared as you begin reaching out to your contacts. Depending on if you are bringing a vendor to campus for an event or hosting an event at an off-campus venue, there is a specific vendor letter to share. The event form will help you to determine the correct letter to share, but they can also be found on the Student Organization Resource and Finance Dragon Link page. So you're planning an event for your organization and you're bringing an outside speaker, performer, DJ, etc. How does a contract happen? It all starts with the event form. You will submit an event form, and one of the questions will ask if you are planning on bringing any services or performers that are not affiliated with Drexel for the event. Be sure that you check that box next to the question, and it will take you to the contract request form. If you are not sure if a contract is needed, check the box anyways, fill out what you can, and we will always work with you to determine if a contract is needed. Be sure to submit your event form based on the correct event level so that there's enough time to get the contracts completed prior to the event. Now we will go into the life of a contract and what steps are required for a contract to be completed. It might seem that a contract just needs to be signed by the vendor to be done, but there are many more steps and campus partners involved in the process. Let's walk through this process using the example that your organization is having a DJ for an event and paying them $700 in total. As you just learned, you would first submit the event form with the contract request form included. Once this is submitted, Student Organization Resource and Finance staff will be tagged to start the contract process. Student Organization Resource and Finance will reach out to the vendor and request the DJ's W-9 and an additional tax form, including the student contact on the email communication. Once the W-9 and tax documents are received, we will then work with the university's procurement, legal, and risk management teams to determine the type of agreement to utilize. The tax forms will be sent to the tax office to be approved, and payment cannot be sent until that step is completed. Once this is determined, the agreement is sent out to the vendor for review and signature. The agreement may request the vendor's certificate of insurance with specific coverage for the service provided, which must be approved by risk management before moving forward. After the agreement is signed by the vendor, Student Organization Resource and Finance will input the vendor information and agreement into SmartSource, the university's payment system. Although it feels like from here, the agreement should be complete by now, there's still a few more steps before it's fully completed and the event form approval can happen. After inputting the agreement into the payment system, SmartSource, the vendor is sent a registration link to build their supplier profile. This requires them to input their business information and select payment preferences, and after they complete the registration, it is reviewed and approved by the university's procurement department. If all is good with the registration, the contract is then countersigned and a purchase order for the full amount of payment is sent to the vendor. After all of these steps, finally, the event form can be approved from the contracting lens as the contract is complete. After the event happens, the payment is sent to the vendor. Note that no purchase request is needed to pay for a vendor we are contracting with, as the payment occurs through the contract process. These are some common things that can delay the contract process from being fully completed. There are a lot of steps as we just learned, but if one piece is missing, it can delay that next step from happening. Sometimes vendors make revisions to the agreement that is sent, and they may not agree with a specific term. If this happens, the agreement cannot move to the next step until the revisions are reviewed and approved by the Office of General Counsel, or OGC. This can sometimes take a few times going back and forth between OGC and the vendor before the terms are agreed upon. Another common delay is if the vendor does not have insurance that meets the required standards. There really is not room to negotiate when it comes to the insurance coverage needed, so this can sometimes cause a large delay while the vendor determines the best way to find that coverage and move forward. The last common delay is with the vendor's SmartSource registration. Sometimes a vendor does not complete the registration quickly, does not complete it at all, or misses a step within that registration. Without the completed registration, the contract cannot be countersigned by the university, and we have no way of sending payment. So it is important that the vendor does the full registration in a timely manner to keep the process moving and complete the contract. The full process we just went over for the life of a contract is mostly for paid contracts. If you're having a vendor that is not paid, the process can be much simpler. If you're having a speaker at your general body meeting, for example, the W-9 would still be requested to ensure that we are properly addressing the contract information with the individual or business you are utilizing. The agreement is then drafted and sent for review by the vendor's speaker, and once returned, sent to the University Procurement Office for signature. If there are no changes made to the agreement is simply signed by procurement and returned, which means the event form can be approved from the contract lens. Keep in mind that campus partners are still utilized to determine the type of agreement, but this process for non-paid contracts can be a bit quicker than the paid process. Here are some helpful tips and reminders that you can do to help keep the contract process moving forward. Be sure your notifications are on in DragonLink, as the event form comments will be the best communication for any questions, issues, or updates about the contract status. The student you include as the primary contact in the contract request form will be included on the communication to the vendor. So if they see the vendor is not responding, it's really helpful to have your organization follow up with the vendor to have them respond and keep the process moving. While your organization can always utilize new vendors, if you use a vendor from the preferred vendor list, which can be found on the Student Organization Resource and Finance DragonLink page, the process can move much quicker as the vendor is familiar with the steps and meets the university requirements. Lastly, as a reminder, the event form cannot be fully approved until the contracts for that event are fully complete. So the earlier you're able to submit the event form, the earlier the process can begin to allow for more marketing time for your event. Thank you for watching this presentation and learning a bit more about the contracting process. Remember that you can always reach out with questions about the process either via email, stopping by the SORC, or commenting on your event form if it's related to that specific event. We are here to help you in all aspects of the contract request and event planning process.